Have you ever lost everything for doing the right thing? That morning, all Sarah wanted was to protect her son, but it took just one act of love to hear the words that would shatter her world. "You're fired." What she didn't know was that someone had been watching, and that someone carried a past that would soon intertwine with hers in the most unexpected way. But what happened next will leave you speechless. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share this story with anyone who needs to believe that even the worst day of your life might be hiding the best new beginning. Let's dive in. It had been 3 weeks since that awful day, and reality hit Sarah like a relentless storm. A white envelope with the electric bill trembled in her hands as she did mental math, trying to figure out what was left in her bank account. The numbers never added up. They never did. Jake sat on the living room floor playing with his toy cars, blissfully unaware of the financial hurricane tearing through his mother's life. "Mommy, can I have those cookies you hid?" he asked, looking up with innocent eyes. Sarah swallowed hard. Those cookies were meant for emergencies, and right now this was one. The nearly empty fridge echoed like a cruel reminder of their new reality. Sarah opened and closed it 3 times, hoping something new might magically appear. Just a half-eaten jar of jelly, a few stale slices of bread, and a bottle of milk that would expire in 2 days. "How did we end up here?" she whispered, resting her forehead against the cold door. The warped reflection in the stainless steel showed a woman she barely recognized. Dark circles under her eyes, messy hair, and the weight of responsibility carved into every line of her face. The phone rang. Sarah rushed to answer, hoping it was a positive response to one of the dozens of resumes she'd sent out. "Hello, Sarah Miller?" The voice was professional, almost robotic. "Yes, that's me," she replied, her heart picking up speed. "I'm sorry, but we've decided not to move forward with your application. Your profile is strong, but, well, we heard about the incident at your last job." The world seemed to spin in slow motion. Word of her firing had spread like wildfire. "Thanks for letting me know," she managed to whisper before hanging up, hands shaking. That night, after tucking Jake into bed with a made-up story about brave princesses who never gave up, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by piles of bills and a calculator that felt like it was mocking her. The dim yellow light cast dramatic shadows across her face as she scribbled numbers onto a paper already full of crossed-out figures. Late rent, maxed-out credit card, overdue phone bill. Every number was a chain pulling her deeper into the pit of despair. "What am I gonna do?" she whispered into the silence. And for the first time in years, she let herself cry without worrying if Jake would hear. By the time morning crept in, Sarah was still awake, her bloodshot eyes fixed on job sites. The laptop screen blinked coldly. No positions found for your profile. She'd applied to roles way below her qualifications, but even those turned her down. The stigma of being fired for unprofessional conduct followed her like a shadow. Every rejection was a stab, every silence a slammed door. Sarah buried her face in her hands, feeling the crushing weight of every choice, every sacrifice she'd made, trying to be both a mother and a professional. At dawn, Jake burst into the kitchen in his Spider-Man pajamas, his smile lighting up the whole house. "Morning, Mommy. Are we making pancakes today?" His innocent question hit her like a punch to the gut. Pancakes meant eggs, fresh milk, flour, luxuries she couldn't afford. "How about toast with jelly, sweetie?" she offered, forcing a cheerful tone. Jake made a face but agreed, wrapping his arms tightly around her waist. "Are you okay, Mommy? Your eyes look red." That one sentence cut deeper than any job rejection. As she fixed their simple breakfast, Sarah watched Jake coloring in an old notebook he found in the drawer. He drew a house with 2 smiling stick figures at the door, one big, one small. "That's us, Mommy. In our new house," he said proudly. "New house?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yeah, you said we might have to move, so I drew a pretty house for just the 2 of us." Sarah's heart cracked a little more. Jake's innocence turned even the threat of eviction into an adventure. Then came more bad news in the mail. A past due notice in bold red letters and a deadline looming like a guillotine. Sarah hid the envelope before Jake could see it, but the pressure in her chest kept growing. 15 days. she murmured, staring at the calendar. 15 days to find a miracle. 15 days before everything collapsed. She wondered if someone could actually die from stress, if a heart could just stop under too much weight. But then, like a ray of light breaking through storm clouds, the phone rang again. This time, the voice on the line was different, warm, confident. Sarah Miller? This is Patricia from Anderson & Associates HR department. We'd like to schedule an interview with you for tomorrow. Would 2 p.m. work? Sarah could barely believe what she was hearing. Yes, absolutely, she said, her voice louder than she meant. Jake looked up from his drawing. A company she'd never heard of had somehow found her resume online and wanted to talk. But something about the call felt off. Why now? Why, when she'd hit rock bottom, did this chance suddenly appear? Sarah Elizabeth Miller wasn't born a fighter, but life had forged her into one. At 32, she carried on her shoulders a story that could have broken stronger people, but it only made her more resilient. Her green eyes, an inheritance from her Irish grandmother, held the weight of sleepless nights and postponed dreams. Yet beneath it all, there was a fierce determination burning through her like liquid fire. When she smiled, which didn't happen nearly as often as it should, tiny wrinkles formed around her eyes, silent witnesses of years spent carrying the world on her back. Her hands, always in motion, told the story of a woman who never stopped, who was always fixing, cleaning, organizing something. Sarah's journey began 8 years earlier, when she found out she was pregnant at 24. Jake's father, Marcus, had promised the world, talked about marriage and a perfect family. But when the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, he vanished like smoke in the wind, leaving behind only a hastily scribbled note. I'm not ready for this. I'm sorry. Sarah kept that crumpled piece of paper in a drawer, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder that the only person she could truly count on was herself. That night, alone in her tiny apartment, she cried until there were no more tears. Then she wiped her face, stood up, and started planning what life would look like as a single mom. The first years were an emotional roller coaster that tested every fiber of her being. She worked as an administrative assistant by day and studied marketing at night, Jake asleep on her lap as she wrote essays. Some nights, she collapsed into bed at 2 a.m., only to be up by 6 to Jake's sleepy voice asking for breakfast and whispering about nightmares. "Mommy's here, baby," she'd say, holding him close, even when she felt like she was falling apart inside. Well-meaning neighbors would chime in with unsolicited advice. "You should find a husband. Every kid needs a dad." Sarah would smile politely and change the subject, but inside she wanted to scream that she and Jake were already a complete family. Graduating with a marketing degree was a battle won through sweat, tears, and pure willpower. Sarah walked the stage as the class speaker, with Jake in her arms because she had no one to leave him with. "Why's everyone clapping, Mommy?" he asked, eyes wide. "Because Mommy just did something really important, baby." In that moment, holding her diploma in one hand and Jake in the other, Sarah felt unstoppable. She had proven to herself that she could be both a mother and a professional, that she could rewrite her story. The marketing job came like a blessing after months of exhausting interviews. She impressed her bosses with her creativity and drive, quickly climbing from assistant to project coordinator. She showed up early, stayed late, and always made time to take school calls when Jake needed her. "My son's my priority, but my work is my passion," she'd say to colleagues who marveled at how she managed it all. Jake learned early on to stay quiet during Mom's important calls, coloring at his little desk while she worked weekends from home. But behind that strong, independent facade, Sarah carried fears that haunted her in the quiet of the night. The fear of not being enough as a mother, of Jake growing up resenting her for his father's absence, of never being truly loved, baggage and all. Am I being selfish for wanting a career? She'd wonder, watching Jake sleep, his brown hair spread across the pillow like a little angel. Guilt was a constant companion, whispering that real moms stayed home, that children needed full-time attention. Her sacrifices were daily and silent, like prayers never spoken aloud. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd bought clothes for herself. Her savings always went to Jake's school books, new shoes, or the bike he'd been dreaming of. She trimmed her own hair watching YouTube tutorials, painted her nails with clearance polish, and dreamed of a day she could walk into a store and buy something without checking her bank app first. "Mommy, why don't you ever buy pretty things for you?" Jake once asked, catching her staring at a dress in a shop window. "Because you're the prettiest thing in my life, baby." Sarah's strength came from a place so deep and untouchable it felt infinite. A wellspring of maternal love that gave her the power to move mountains when needed. She was the type of woman who solved problems before they even showed up, who kept emergency money in jars tucked around the house, who knew every one of Jake's teachers by name and by life story. When other moms complained about how hard motherhood was, Sarah would just smile and offer help, because she knew her battles were fought on a different field, one without the luxury of sharing the load with a partner. Now, walking toward the mirrored building of Anderson & Associates, Sarah adjusted the blazer she'd ironed 3 times the night before and whispered a silent prayer. Jake was at school, safe, sound, and unaware that the next 30 minutes could change everything. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone, a reminder about the upcoming parent-teacher meeting, a credit card due in 2 days, a note about Jake's birthday next month. Life didn't stop for personal crises, and Sarah had learned to navigate chaos like a ballerina dancing through a storm. But something about this interview felt different, as if fate itself was holding its breath, ready to rewrite her story again. The interview went well, or at least, that's what Sarah believed as she left the building with a hopeful smile and a promise to hear back in 48 hours. But the very next day, reality knocked on her door, or rather, Mrs. Carmam, her 70-year-old neighbor, did. "Sarah, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about Jake." Sarah's heart dropped. Yesterday he came over crying. Said the boys at school were making fun of him. Said his clothes were for poor kids. The words cut deeper than any knife. Sarah thought she'd shielded Jake from their financial struggles. But kids have a way of spotting weakness, even when adults try to hide it. That night, while helping Jake with his homework, Sarah noticed how he avoided talking about school. "How was your day, baby?" she asked, sitting beside him at the tiny kitchen table. Jake pressed his pencil too hard, the tip snapping against the paper. "It was fine," he muttered, eyes down. Sarah recognized that tone. It was the same one she used when trying to hide her own pain. "Jake, you can tell me anything. You know that, right?" He finally looked up, and in those brown eyes Sarah saw a sadness no 8-year-old should ever carry. "Why don't we have the same things the other kids do, Mommy?" The question echoed in her mind for days, especially when Anderson & Associates called with the job offer. "Congratulations, Sarah. You start Monday," Patricia said cheerfully, and Sarah tried to match the tone. But behind the joy, a new worry started to bloom. The job was full-time, 8 to 6. Jake got out of school at 4:30. Those 2 hours felt like an impossible canyon. She mentally scanned her options. The private daycare was way too expensive, her parents lived out of town, and leaning on neighbors felt unfair. Then came Mrs. Miriam, a 50-something woman who babysat from her apartment. "I can keep an eye on Jake after school," she offered, after Sarah explained her situation, her voice tight with emotion. The price was doable, but Sarah soon realized that affordable and safe didn't always go hand in hand. Miriam had 4 other kids under her care, all fighting for space in a cramped, stuffy apartment. Jake would come home with stained clothes, talking about fights and how Miss Miriam forgot snack time. Sarah's heart cracked a little more every time he spoke. That first month at the new job threw hurdles she hadn't seen coming. Her co-workers were cutthroat, competitive to the point of cruelty. They questioned her every move, throwing in passive-aggressive remarks about her lack of experience in serious firms. During one meeting, Sarah pitched a bold campaign idea. Marcus, not Jake's father, but an unfortunately named co-worker, rolled his eyes dramatically. "Interesting, Sarah, but maybe you should stick to tasks more suited to your level." It was a slap in the face, especially with Mr. Anderson, the elusive CEO, sitting quietly in the room. She hadn't even met him yet. Evenings turned into a race against exhaustion. Sarah would leave work at 7, pick up Jake from Miriam's, make dinner, help with homework, bathe him, tell bedtime stories, and tuck him in. Only then, When the apartment fell silent, would she collapse on the couch with her laptop to finish whatever work she hadn't managed during the day? Her eyes burned, her back ached, and more than once she fell asleep on the keyboard, waking up with key marks on her cheek and her neck twisted. "Mommy, you're getting skinny," Jake said one morning, gently touching her face. Sarah tried to smile, but deep down she knew he was right. She was losing weight she couldn't afford to lose. The breaking point came on a gray Thursday. Right in the middle of a major presentation, Sarah's phone rang. "Mrs. Miller, Jake's in the nurse's office with a high fever. You need to pick him up right away." She looked around the conference room, every eye on her, waiting for her to finish explaining the new digital strategy. I have to go. It's a family emergency." The whispers started before she even left the room. Marcus smirked and mumbled something about professional priorities that burned in Sarah's ears like acid. She walked out with her cheeks on fire, knowing this would be used against her. At the hospital, holding Jake's warm little hand as he slept with an IV in his arm, Sarah questioned every choice she'd ever made. "Mommy's here, baby," she whispered, kissing his sweaty forehead. Jake opened his eyes, still dazed from the meds. "Sorry for getting sick, Mommy. I know you had important work." The words cut deeper than she thought possible. An 8-year-old shouldn't feel guilty for getting sick, shouldn't carry the weight of adult worries. "No, baby. Don't ever apologize for that. You're the most important thing in my world." But even as she said it, Sarah knew she needed to find a balance that still felt completely out of reach. Back at work on Friday, the atmosphere was thick with silent judgment. Patricia from HR pulled her aside for an informal chat that felt anything but. "Sarah, we know you're talented, but we need to talk about commitment. Some of the staff have mentioned your absences." Sarah wanted to scream. They weren't absences, they were emergencies. Moments when being a mother outweighed being an employee. But she swallowed her frustration and just nodded, promising it wouldn't happen again. On her way out, she spotted Tom Rodriguez, the graphic designer, waiting in the hallway. "Tough break," he said, flashing a knowing smile. "I get it." It was the first time someone in that office had shown real empathy. And Sarah couldn't help but wonder what story he was hiding behind those kind eyes, and why it felt like Tom understood exactly what she was going through. The weekend brought a kind of determination Sarah hadn't felt in months. Sitting at the kitchen table with Jake drawing beside her and a mug of cold coffee in hand, she scribbled notes into a crumpled notebook. "What are you doing, Mommy?" Jake asked, looking up from his superhero sketch. "I'm planning how we're going to change our lives, sweetheart." And that's exactly what she intended to do. Sarah had made a choice. She wasn't going to be the invisible employee who apologized for simply existing anymore. She was going to create something so brilliant, so bold, that they wouldn't be able to ignore her. The campaign she'd started outlining combined digital marketing with immersive physical experiences, something the company had never even attempted. On Monday, Sarah showed up at the office 40 minutes early, with a meticulously organized folder and a presentation she'd practiced in front of the bathroom mirror until she could recite it in her sleep. But the universe seemed determined to test her resolve. Her computer froze 3 times. The printer ran out of toner halfway through printing her charts. And Marcus, the coworker who seemed to enjoy sabotaging her, made sure to comment loudly about people who arrive early to make up for lack of talent. Sarah took a deep breath, counted to 10, and kept going. Every obstacle just fueled the fire inside her. The perfect opportunity came during Wednesday's team meeting. Patricia announced that the company was looking for innovative ideas for an important client, a restaurant chain aiming to revamp its image. "Anyone have suggestions?" she asked, scanning the room. Sarah's heart started to race. This was it. "I have a proposal," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Every head turned toward her, some curious, others clearly skeptical. Marcus rolled his eyes theatrically. "Let's hear it," Patricia replied, her tone far from encouraging. Sarah opened her folder with barely noticeable trembling hands and began presenting her idea. She proposed a campaign that blended personalized digital marketing with immersive dining experiences, pop-up events in unexpected city spots where customers could sample exclusive dishes, while interacting with digital content in real time. Imagine, she said, gaining momentum. People posting photos not just of their food, but of a one-of-a-kind experience only our brand can offer. For a moment, the room fell silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding like a war drum. Interesting, Patricia finally said, though her voice wavered. It's ambitious. Marcus jumped at the opening. Sounds overly complex and expensive. Our client wants results, not art projects. Each word felt like a stone thrown at Sarah's confidence, but she didn't back down. Actually, she replied, calm and measured, studies show that memorable experiences generate 40% more engagement on social media than traditional campaigns. She'd spent her entire Sunday gathering data to support her idea. I can develop a pilot version on a tight budget so we can test it. What Sarah didn't expect was the voice that spoke up next, from someone who'd been silent the entire time. Develop the idea, said a deep, commanding voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Mr. Anderson, David Anderson, the elusive CEO, stepping into the meeting like a force of nature. He was younger than Sarah expected, maybe in his early 40s, with silver streaks at his temples and eyes that seemed to see right through people. I want a full proposal on my desk by Friday. Sarah felt a wave of equal parts euphoria and panic. 5 days to create something that could either launch or crush her career. The following days were a blur of caffeine, spreadsheets, research, and sleepless nights. Sarah turned her desk into mission control. Papers everywhere, colorful post-its on her monitor, 3 half-empty coffee mugs. Jake, sensing his mother's intensity, started doing his homework in complete silence, like he instinctively knew she was fighting an important battle. "You've got this, Mommy," he said one night, hugging her from behind while she typed. "You always do." His innocent faith was a balm to her exhausted soul. By Thursday night, when she finally printed the 15-page proposal that had cost her sanity, Sarah felt a dizzying mix of pride and burnout. The document was flawless, each chart calculated, every word chosen carefully, every strategy grounded in real data. She hadn't just created a campaign, she'd written a manifesto on the future of experiential marketing. Tom walked past her desk as she was organizing her papers. "Burning the midnight oil again?" he asked with that now familiar gentle smile. "This is my last shot," Sarah admitted, more vulnerable than she meant to be. "Then it'll work," he said confidently. "People like you always find a way." Friday morning, Sarah handed her proposal directly to Mr. Anderson's assistant, palms sweating and heart pounding. "He'll review it and get back to you by Monday," the assistant said, barely lifting her eyes from the screen. Sarah spent the entire weekend in a constant state of anxiety, checking her phone every 5 minutes as if a magical response might pop up. Jake noticed the tension and tried to cheer her up with silly jokes and funny drawings, but even his sweetness couldn't calm the storm inside her. Monday felt like an eternity away. She couldn't help wondering if she'd just placed all her hopes into something that would be her ticket out, or the final nail in her professional coffin. What she didn't know was that her proposal had impressed someone far more than she ever expected, and that David Anderson was carrying secrets from his own childhood that would make this Monday more interesting than she could possibly imagine. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe for more just like it. Monday arrived with a soft drizzle that mirrored the nerves twisting in Sarah's stomach. She reached the office 15 minutes early, checking her phone compulsively for any updates. The hours dragged like honey dripping from a spoon, every minute feeling like an hour. Then, at exactly 3 p.m., her phone rang. "Sarah, Mr. Anderson would like to see you in his office." "Now," said the assistant, her tone giving nothing away. Sarah's knees went weak as she walked down the hallway, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The office door was slightly ajar, and she could see the imposing silhouette of the CEO framed against the floor-to-ceiling window. "Come in, please," said David Anderson, turning with a smile Sarah couldn't quite read. He gestured to the leather chair across from his polished mahogany desk. Sarah's proposal was open in front of him, marked with handwritten notes in blue ink. "Your idea is provocative," he began, and Sarah felt her heart skip. "Provocative in the best way," he clarified. "How long have you been working with experiential marketing?" The question caught her off guard. To be honest, this was my first serious attempt at it, Mr. Anderson. But I believe fresh eyes bring the best ideas. He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his gray eyes. Call me David, and you're right. People too deep in an industry can lose the ability to innovate. As they discussed the campaign, Sarah noticed something different about him. He wasn't the cold, distant CEO she'd imagined. There was warmth in his gaze when she talked about creating meaningful experiences, and a kind of attentiveness that made her feel truly heard. You mentioned wanting to create moments families could share, he said, flipping through her notes. Is that personal for you? He asked gently, but Sarah felt a flush rise to her neck. I have an 8-year-old son, she said. Jake. And I know how important it is to make memories, even when you're working with limited means. David nodded slowly, like her words had struck a deep chord. After the meeting, Sarah floated through the office with a sense of triumph she hadn't felt in ages. Her proposal had been approved, with a generous budget and a team at her disposal. But more than that, she'd felt a genuine connection with David, a mutual understanding that went beyond corporate roles. She was sorting through papers at her desk when Tom showed up with 2 cups of coffee. You look like someone who just won the lottery, he said, handing her one. Not quite the lottery, but close enough, Sarah replied, grateful. Can I confess something? Tom said, lowering his voice playfully. I overheard your pitch through the meeting room door last week. Total accident, I was walking by and... He hesitated, smiling sheepishly. It was brilliant, really, and I was rooting for you. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude, and something else, something unexpected. Thanks, she said softly. I don't know if it was brilliant, but it was definitely desperate. Sometimes desperation brings out strength we didn't know we had. Tom looked at her with a depth that made her glance away. It wasn't desperation, Sarah. It was courage. There's a difference. The way he said her name with such gentleness made something flutter in her stomach. In the days that followed, Sarah and Tom started working closely on the campaign's visual development. He was in charge of the graphic design, and his ideas meshed perfectly with her vision. They stayed late at the office, surrounded by sketches, prototypes, and cold pizza, laughing at inside jokes and sharing personal stories between meetings. Do you have kids? Sarah asked one night, noticing doodles in the margins of his sketchpad. I have a daughter, Tom said, voice tinged with quiet sadness. Emma. She's 7, lives with her mom in California. Sarah felt the unspoken pain in his words. That must be hard. It is, he admitted, but it was the only way to start over. There was a story there, a story of hurt and healing that mirrored her own in many ways. One Friday evening, while finalizing presentations, Tom noticed Sarah rubbing her temples. Headache? He asked gently. Just tired, she sighed. Jake has a school presentation tomorrow and I promised I'd be there, but I still have these spreadsheets to finish. Tom quietly pulled up a chair beside her and offered his help. For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side, Tom handling technical tasks while Sarah focused on strategy. There was something deeply intimate in that silent teamwork, the way they anticipated each other's moves, the quiet harmony of minds in sync. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked when they finally finished. Because, Tom said, locking eyes with her. Sometimes we all need someone who understands. That night, walking together to the parking lot, Tom opened up a little more. He'd divorced 2 years ago after discovering his ex-wife had been cheating. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, he said, kicking a pebble across the pavement. It was realizing Emma grew up thinking her parents didn't love each other. Kids pick up on everything, don't they? They feel the tension, even when we try to hide it. Sarah nodded, thinking of all the times Jake had asked about his dad, and how she'd covered her pain with vague answers. Jake asks why he doesn't have a dad like the other kids, she confessed, and I never know what to say. You answer him by being both mom and dad, and from what I've seen, you're doing an amazing job. The sincerity in Tom's voice hit Sarah harder than she expected. Their emotional moment was broken by Sarah's phone ringing. It was Jake calling from Miriam's apartment, his voice shaky. Mommy, can I come home? Miss Miriam forgot to give me dinner and I'm really hungry. Sarah felt a mix of guilt and anger flare in her chest. Of course, baby. Mommy's on her way. She hung up and turned to Tom, who had heard the whole thing. I have to go, she said, sharper than she meant. Sarah, wait, Tom said, gently touching her arm. Do you want me to come with you? I can help. The offer was so unexpected and kind, Sarah nearly broke down right there in the parking lot. No, thank you, but I've got it. Tom nodded, though concern lingered in his eyes. If you need anything, call me. Anytime. As she drove off to pick up Jake, Sarah wondered when was the last time someone had offered to help her without wanting something in return, and why Tom's kindness made her feel so vulnerable and so hopeful, all at once. The phone rang at 6:43 p.m., just as Sarah was in the conference room putting the final touches on the campaign. She almost ignored the call, but something deep inside screamed at her to pick up. It was Mrs. Miriam. The trembling voice on the other end was all it took for Sarah's entire body to snap into alarm. Jake, he's gone, Sarah. I just went to the market for 10 minutes, and when I came back, he wasn't there. The room spun. The pen dropped from her hand like her strength had vanished. The world became a distant hum as the words echoed like gunshots in her head. She stood up so fast the chair crashed behind her. The panic on her face drew everyone's attention. My son's missing, she said, her voice cracking. A heavy silence fell over the room. Patricia opened her mouth, stunned, but Sarah was already at the door. Her heart thundered in her chest like it was about to explode. She ran to the elevator, slamming the button so hard her finger hurt. Please, please get me to him, she whispered like a prayer. Outside, a cold drizzle began to fall as if the sky shared in her panic. Sarah drove like she was in a trance, her hands trembling on the steering wheel, city lights blurring behind tears she couldn't hold back. Every minute felt like an eternity. Where are you, Jake? She sobbed, trying to imagine where an 8-year-old could go alone. The guilt burned like acid. She should have been with him. She should have found another way. When she reached Miriam's building, she bolted up the stairs like the place was on fire. The older woman waited at the door, distraught, her eyes red, her hands clasped together in panic. I searched the whole block, asked the neighbors. No one's seen him. Sarah didn't answer. She grabbed her phone and called every number Jake had memorized. None picked up. Her little boy was out there, alone, scared, and it was all her fault. Then her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered, her heart in her throat. Hello? A man's voice. Good evening. I'm with a boy named Jake at the city park. He's okay, but he looked lost. Sarah collapsed onto the hallway floor, clutching her chest like she could stop her heart from exploding. I'm on my way. Please stay with him. Don't let him out of your sight. The man promised he would, and Sarah dashed out the door without even closing it behind her. The park was swallowed in shadows when she arrived. Dim streetlights cast eerie glows across restless shapes. And then, she saw him. Jake sitting on a bench, arms crossed, eyes full of tears. The man beside him stood as soon as he saw her. He's fine. He said he didn't want to stay with Miss Miriam anymore. Sarah rushed to her son, dropped to her knees, and wrapped him in her arms like she'd never let go. Don't ever do that again, baby. I was so scared. Jake cried softly into her shoulder. I'm sorry, Mommy. I just wanted to come home. Later that night, back at home, Sarah bathed Jake with trembling hands, dressed him in his dinosaur pajamas, and tucked him into bed. But she couldn't sleep. Sitting on the edge of his mattress, watching him breathe, she made the hardest decision of her life. She was giving it all up. The job, the project, the chance to grow. None of it mattered more than her son's safety. We'll figure it out, she whispered, brushing back his damp hair. I promise. The next morning, Sarah walked into the office and asked for a meeting with HR. Patricia looked surprised to see her that early. I need to step away. Temporarily. Maybe permanently. My son needs me. Her eyes welled up, but her voice didn't waver. Patricia nodded with a sigh. We'll talk to Mr. Anderson. Sarah waited, and when she was called in, she found David standing by the window, as if he already knew. Is Jake okay? He asked. She nodded. And you? No, she said honestly. But I will be. And for a brief moment she saw something in his face, something that looked like regret. What Sarah didn't know was that David Anderson wasn't just being kind. He'd lived it. Inside his desk drawer was a photo he'd never shown anyone. An old picture of him as a child, asleep beside his mother in an office. This very company. The past was closer than Sarah could have imagined, and it was about to come to light. The next morning, Sarah woke before sunrise. The silence in the apartment felt almost sacred. She sat at the kitchen table, warm tea in hand, staring at the open planner. For the first time in months, the day's page was empty. No meetings, no deadlines, no frantic rush. Just her, Jake, and a vast, unknown future. It was still early, but Sarah knew deep down. This was the beginning of something new, and this time, she would set the pace. Jake woke not long after, his hair a mess, his smile still sleepy. When he saw his mom home on a Monday, he ran to her and climbed into her lap. "Is today a holiday, Mommy?" Sarah laughed, squeezing him tight. "It's our holiday, just ours." They had breakfast together, no rush, eating makeshift pancakes from whatever they had left in the kitchen. It was simple, but there was peace in it. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Work messages started rolling in around 9 a.m. First Patricia, asking for a formal update about her leave. Then Tom, "Are you okay?" Sarah replied to him only, "I'm okay, and thank you for checking in." There was something comforting in knowing that, in the middle of the chaos, someone genuinely cared. Not out of duty, but out of kindness. Tom didn't push. He just answered, "When you're ready, I'll be here." It was more than just words. It felt like a hug through the screen. That afternoon, Sarah took Jake to the park. She watched him run, laugh, play with other kids, fearless again. She sat on a bench watching like it was the first time. Her son was strong, smart, resilient, and he deserved a mom who was present, not just physically, but completely. She pulled out her phone and began writing, a list of ideas, projects, possibilities. Not for another company, but for herself. If no one wants to hire me, maybe I can build my own thing. The thought was terrifying, but also freeing. In the days that followed, Sarah dove into the world of entrepreneurship like someone tossed into the ocean to learn to swim. She read articles, watched tutorials, looked for free coaching programs for single moms. She discovered she qualified for temporary assistance and used what little money she had left to set up a tiny home office in Jake's room. Instead of sinking into self-pity, she turned her pain into fuel. Every late night now felt like planting seeds, not for survival, but for growth. Jake noticed the shift. "Mommy, are you happier now?" he asked one day, drawing next to her new desk. Sarah smiled. "I'm tired, but I'm happy. And that makes all the difference." She pulled him into a hug. There was no glamour, no wild promises. But there was purpose. And in the middle of chaos, purpose is what keeps a mother standing. It was like rebuilding a house from the rubble. Each nail hammered with love, each brick laid with hope. And then, on a rainy Wednesday afternoon when she least expected it, the buzzer rang. Sarah answered, thinking it was the milk delivery. But on the other end, Patricia's steady voice. "Sarah, Mr. Anderson would like to see you. It's not work-related. He said it's personal." Sarah's heart skipped. Personal? She hesitated, glancing at Jake, who was giggling at a cartoon. "Can you come in today?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Yes, I'll be there in an hour." Walking into Anderson and Associates again felt like crossing an invisible line. The receptionist gave her a subtle smile of recognition. "You can go up. He's waiting." Sarah took the elevator alone. No folder, no pitch, no apologies. Just her heart in her hands. When David opened the door, he wasn't wearing a suit. Just a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, expression softer than ever. "Thank you for coming, Sarah." She nodded. "You said it was personal." He motioned for her to sit and pulled something from the drawer. An old photograph, edges yellowed with time. "This kid here, that's me, and that's my mom. She brought me to work every day, here, at this same company." Sarah stared at the picture, heart pounding in her temples. The first time I saw you with Jake in that hallway, it was like seeing myself. I never forgot how it felt, to not belong, to be invisible. And I promised myself that if I ever became a boss, I'd do things differently. The revelation wasn't just a memory. It was the beginning of something much bigger. And Sarah knew. That conversation would change everything. Sarah stared at the photograph in David's hands, a lump rising in her throat. The black and white image of a young woman holding her sleeping son, surrounded by folders and paperwork, felt painfully familiar. She worked here? Sarah asked, her voice rough with emotion. David nodded. She was the assistant to the former director, worked double shifts to support me, and got fired the day she brought me in without warning. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was historical. Two lives separated by decades now collided like puzzle pieces long lost and finally found. And your mom, how did she handle it? Sarah asked, already imagining the answer. She cried. A lot. Then, she started selling homemade meals. She never came back to an office. But she always said that day was a turning point. David exhaled and looked out the window. For years I hated this building. I swore that if I ever made it to the top, I'd protect people like her. Like you. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She hadn't expected more than a possible closure from this meeting, but now it felt like she was standing at a crossroads that might change her life again. That's when David opened a leather folder on the desk. This is a new project, and I want you to lead it. Sarah's eyes widened. But I asked for a leave. David nodded. And that still stands, if you want it. But this project was inspired by your pitch. I don't just want a campaign. I want a program that rethinks how companies support single moms. Not as charity, as smart business. Sarah flipped through the documents. The idea was bold, transformative, a blend of marketing, social impact, and emotional branding, and her name was right at the top of the org chart. You're offering me a promotion? She almost laughed in disbelief. No, I'm offering you a new beginning. But it'll take full commitment, unpredictable hours, a team under your leadership. You'd be directly responsible. Sarah closed the folder and rested it on her lap. Outwardly, she tried to stay composed, but inside her mind spun. And Jake? The question hung in the air like a dare. David lowered his eyes. That choice is yours, and it's the hardest one. But maybe you don't have to make it alone anymore. That night, Sarah sat awake on the floor of Jake's room, watching him sleep. The room was simple, but alive. Crooked drawings on the walls, armless action figures, books read 1,000 times. She thought of everything she'd given up for him. And now, was it wrong to finally choose something for herself? Could she grow professionally without sacrificing motherhood? The folder sat on the couch in the living room, like a promise. Or a trap. The next morning, Sarah found Tom waiting in the school parking lot. You look like someone who spent the night deciding the fate of the world, he teased with that smile that made her breathe a little easier. Maybe I did, she replied, humorless. He caught it. Want to talk? She nodded. As they walked to a nearby cafe, she told him everything. The offer, David's story, her own conflict between embracing the opportunity or putting Jake first. What if you don't have to choose? Tom asked, taking her hand. What if you get to write the rules this time? Back at the office, Sarah requested another meeting with David. He received her with the same calm, unreadable demeanor. Have you decided? She took a deep breath. Yes, I accept. On one condition. David raised an eyebrow. I want to build a flexible leadership model. I want to lead this project in a way that allows other mothers to be present in their children's lives. Flexible hours, remote work, on-site kid spaces. David paused, then smiled, proud. You're building the dream my mom never got to see. More than a proposal, Sarah offered a manifesto. A new culture. A quiet revolution inside a company that, not long ago, saw mothers as a risk. David signed off on it. Literally. This is the beginning of something bigger, Sarah. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. It's just the beginning, she said, shaking his hand firmly. Outside his office, Tom was waiting with a hot coffee. So, future president? He joked. She smiled. Not yet, but close. What Sarah didn't know was that someone behind the scenes was plotting to destroy it all, and was ready to strike. The first days of the new project felt like a delicate dance between excitement and suspicion. Sarah now had a glass-walled office with a view of the city, but the weight of the decisions she had to make couldn't fit in her sleek desk or well-designed documents. Many employees admired her. Others whispered behind her back. Promoted out of pity, she heard someone mumble in the hallway. She pretended not to hear, but each comment was a crack in her confidence. Then, on a rainy Monday, came the first direct hit. Sarah was in a meeting with Tom and two managers when Patricia walked in, face tense. We've got a problem. She handed over a brown envelope with printed documents. We received an anonymous complaint about you. They're claiming data from your initial campaign proposal was falsified. Sarah's face went pale. That's a lie. But she knew. In a corporation that size, a well-told lie could ruin everything. The world turned gray again. The anonymous report had highlighted tables and figures from Sarah's proposal, accusing her of using unverified sources. This was planted, Tom said angrily. You used verified data. I reviewed it with you. Sarah nodded. But something worse lingered beneath the accusation. She knew who might be behind it. Marcus. He'd undermined her from the beginning. And now, it looked like he was trying to wipe her out completely. He's trying to take me off the project, she whispered. And he might succeed. David was called for an emergency meeting. He entered with a firm stride and razor-sharp gaze. He read every page in silence, then looked at Sarah. Can you confirm that all data was legally obtained? Yes. I can prove it. He nodded. Then do it. You have until tomorrow at 10 a.m. Until then, the project is on hold. The words hit harder than shouting. It felt like the bridge she'd started building was now on fire beneath her feet. And once again, the fear of failing Jake haunted her. That night, Sarah didn't go home. She stayed at the office until dawn, digging through files, emails, screenshots, archived links. Each document recovered felt like a brick trying to rebuild her credibility. Tom stayed beside her the whole time, quiet, loyal, exhausted. You'll prove it, Sarah. And once you do, no one will silence you again. She nodded silently. And for the first time, she let him hold her. She cried right there in the middle of the conference room, head on his chest, finally feeling safe, even if only for a moment. At 9:59 the next morning, Sarah walked into David's office, navy folder in hand, chin held high. Here are all the original sources, timestamps, saved links, confirmation from the stats agency. David reviewed it thoroughly. When he finished, he looked at Patricia. It's all accurate. Sarah exhaled shakily. But before she could relax, David continued. And we'll open an internal investigation into the complaint. This company's integrity is on the line. She nodded, though her eyes said the name no one dared speak. 2 hours later, Marcus was called into the boardroom. He didn't return. Rumors spread that he had been suspended. Sarah didn't celebrate. She just returned to her office, closed the door, and stared out the window, eyes full of tears. Not from sadness, but from exhaustion. The fight to prove her worth never seemed to end. But something inside her had shifted. She now knew how to defend herself. She was no longer the woman who cried alone in the hallway. Now, she knew where her power lived. That same afternoon, Tom walked in with 2 mugs of coffee. Temporary peace? He asked. Sarah smiled. For today, yeah. He sat across from her, his voice soft. You're incredible. Not for what you do, but for who you are when everything falls apart. She looked at him quietly. And then, as if jumping off a cliff, unsure if she'd fly, she asked, Will you stay with me tonight? The words came out softer than the wind. Tom took her hand. I'll stay, as long as you need me. Later that day, as Sarah and Tom left to pick up Jake from school, a notification lit up her phone. It was an email from an old college classmate. Subject line: What you need to know about your mother's past. She stopped on the sidewalk, heart skipping. Tom looked at her, concerned. Everything okay? Sarah didn't answer. She just opened the email, and in the first few lines saw a name: the former director of the company, the same man who had fired David and his mother, a name that also appeared in her own mother's records, in a place Sarah never imagined. The words on the email pulsed on the screen like they were screaming. Mrs. Clara Miller worked as Mr. Alfredo Noguera's secretary from 1987 to 1992. Sarah froze. That name. The same man who had fired David's mother, who David once described as the face of a cold, merciless system, was the same man her own mother had avoided mentioning for years. The email went on to reveal that Clara had been silenced after reporting misconduct at the office, and had vanished from the professional world after an internal scandal. Sarah felt as if a heavy veil had just been lifted before her eyes. For years, Sarah's mother, who had passed when Jake was just a baby, had carried secrets in her eyes. Long silences, half-told stories. Now, it all made sense. Maybe I'm finishing what she started, Sarah whispered, still standing on the sidewalk, phone in hand. Tom, sensing the gravity of the moment, gently wrapped his arms around her. Do you want to talk about it? She nodded quietly, still unable to fully process what it meant. But something inside her clicked. For the first time in a long, long time. In the days that followed, Sarah worked like never before. Not out of fear, not to prove herself, but because something deep inside her had awakened. She now understood why she felt she was exactly where she needed to be. The project wasn't just about working moms, it was about justice, breaking cycles, giving voice to those who had been silenced for generations. This place is going to change, she told the team during a meeting. And not just because of me, but for all the women who came before and didn't get to stay. Inspired, Sarah decided to include a special section in the project. A historical display honoring women like her mother and David's. An internal exhibit with photos, documents, and testimonials from mothers who had left their jobs to care for their children, or had been unjustly let go. When she presented the idea to David, he stayed quiet for a long time, then discreetly wiped at his eyes. Your mother. She worked with my father. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. 2 generations, connected by pain, and now, by transformation. Tom became more involved in the project too, serving as lead designer and co-author of one of its creative campaigns. The time they shared grew more personal, gentler, truer. One day while laying out the exhibition design, he looked at her and said, Do you realize what you're doing? You're writing a different kind of story, and I'm just grateful to be watching it up close. Sarah smiled. No, you're part of it. And in that moment she knew. She didn't have to face any of it alone anymore. Jake, too, began to blossom as Sarah regained her strength. His nightmares became rare. The sadness in his eyes faded. One night, as she tucked him into bed, he whispered, Mommy, when I grow up, I want to work where you work so I can be with you all day. She laughed softly and replied, Then I'll make this place the kind of company where kids like you can dream big. Jake smiled. Then you already won, right? Sarah closed her eyes, holding his tiny hand. Not yet. But I'm getting there. At the same time, Sarah began writing a book, a fictionalized version of her story. It was her way of preserving it, and maybe reaching other invisible women along the way. She wrote in the middle of the night, Jake sleeping beside her, a dim lamp glowing, tea slowly going cold. Every word was catharsis. A scar turned into art, a wound healing from the inside out. The project gained traction internally and started spreading across professional networks. Sarah was invited to speak at events where she shared her story with honesty. No embellishments. She talked about sleepless nights, fear, shame, but also faith. That quiet, resilient kind only mothers know. At one event, someone in the audience asked, If you could go back, what would you do differently? Sarah smiled gently. I would have forgiven myself sooner. Because being strong doesn't mean never falling. It means always getting back up. But what Sarah didn't know was that her real recognition wouldn't come from awards or campaign results. It would come from a forgotten letter hidden in the back of an old drawer, written by someone she thought never truly understood her, and now revealing a truth that would change everything. The letter was tucked inside an old shoebox, buried in Sarah's closet between faded photographs, worn-out planners, and Jake's earliest drawings. She found it while looking for his vaccination papers. A white envelope, her mother's handwriting, dated 2 months before she passed. Sarah sat on the floor, her heart pounding. That handwriting, so familiar, so missed. With trembling hands, she opened it. "My daughter, if you're reading this, it means you've already learned what took me a lifetime to understand. Being a mother was never a mistake, but forgetting myself was." The letter was a confession, a reflection, and a blessing. Clara wrote about her time working at the very same company, the quiet humiliations, the days she snuck Sarah into work, and the moment she was fired for no longer hiding it. "I stayed silent to protect you, but I always believed that one day you'd break the cycle." Her mother's words cut through Sarah's chest, then stitched it back together with golden thread. Everything finally made sense. It wasn't coincidence. It was legacy. Clara had started to change the world, and now it was Sarah's turn to carry it forward. She folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the notebook where she'd been writing her book. "This story isn't just mine," she whispered. "It's ours. It belongs to all of us." And she made a decision. The letter would be read aloud during the ceremony launching the company's new family support policy. The following week, Sarah stepped onto the stage with Jake in the crowd and Tom sitting in the front row. Beside her stood David Anderson, photographers, journalists, mothers with babies in their arms, moved employees. She told her story with raw honesty. She read her mother's letter. She cried, and made others cry too. When she finished, the crowd gave her a standing ovation. But it wasn't about her. It was about naming the silent pain of thousands. It was about creating space where judgment once lived. At the end of the event, David handed Sarah a plaque. "Clara Miller Room, support space for working mothers." She couldn't hold back the tears. "This is more than I ever dreamed." David smiled. "It was Mrs. Miller who taught us, you just reminded us." Jake ran to the stage and hugged his mom tightly. "Are you famous now?" he whispered in her ear. "No, baby, I'm free, and that's better than fame." The crowd applauded, but inside her a stillness whispered, "Mission accomplished." Sarah published her book 2 months later. Between diapers and deadlines became an unexpected hit, read in mom clubs, universities, and leadership circles. Her story inspired countless others. More invitations came, but she chose carefully. "Nothing that takes me away from Jake," she'd say. Tom, now her partner, became co-founder of their social project, a training program to help single mothers re-enter the workforce. Their tiny apartment office became headquarters. Their chaos turned into purpose. One Sunday afternoon, while watching a movie as a family, Jake turned to Sarah and asked, "Are you happy, Mommy?" She looked at him, at Tom on the couch, and smiled. "I am. Because I learned that happiness isn't about having it all. It's about knowing what's worth holding on to." And in that moment, with sunlight pouring through the windows, she knew she was finally home, inside herself. There was no more fear, only faith. Faith in the path, faith in time, faith in love. Sarah's journey began with a firing for trying to be both a mother and a professional. But it ended with her being celebrated for proving the two are not mutually exclusive. She didn't succeed despite her struggles. She succeeded because of them. And now every woman who walked into that company with a child in her arms was no longer seen as a problem, but as the beginning of a better way to lead. And it all started with what looked like the end. Do you know someone who's faced this, working with no one to leave their child with? Share their story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this.